You're pulling up a zipper. Tiny metal teeth close behind your hand, perfectly, without drama. You use it every week. Now explain exactly how it works. Not what it does, not why it's useful, the steps, the little sequence that turns two separated edges into one locked seam. For a moment, confidence stays intact, then it thins. You reach for words and discover you are holding something more like familiarity. In 2002, Leonid Rozenblit and Keil gave that collapse a name. The illusion of explanatory depth. Across 12 studies, they found people overestimated how well they understood causal mechanisms, especially ordinary devices and natural systems. The trick is that everyday life rarely asks for explanation. It asks for use. Turn the handle, press the button, trust the hidden mechanism. Ask me whether I understand a toilet, and I might say yes. Ask me to diagram the path of water, and something changes. Rozenblit and Keil used items like zippers, toilets, speedometers, helicopters, and piano keys because they felt both familiar and mechanically opaque. Recognition has texture. It feels like knowledge because the object sits comfortably in memory. You can picture it. You can name it. In the original studies, participants first rated their understanding, then tried to explain the mechanism, then rated themselves again. After explanation, confidence dropped. Not because the objects changed, but because the mind finally tested its own model. Pause. That drop is the interesting part. The ignorance was there before. The explanation simply made the missing pieces visible. They found this illusion was stronger for causal explanations than for facts, stories, or simple procedures. Why mechanisms? Because mechanisms have joints. One step must connect to another. A label can float. A causal chain has to hold. A toilet flushes, so we assume we understand flushing. But where does suction come from? What starts the siphon? When does the tank refill? Rozenblit and Keil wrote that people feel they understand complex phenomena with more precision, coherence, and depth than they really do. This isn't stupidity, it's efficiency. A mind that carried every hidden detail of every object would drown in its own inventory. The 2002 paper argued that we often confuse access to knowledge in the world with knowledge stored inside our own heads. The mind stores handles, it remembers where to look, whom to ask, which category something belongs to. That usually works beautifully. In 2013, Philip Fernbach and colleagues brought the illusion into politics, asking people to explain policy mechanisms rather than list reasons. When participants explained how a policy would produce outcomes, many rated their understanding lower afterward. Softly, that's different from asking, why do you believe this? Reasons can become armor. Mechanisms behave more like stress tests. Fernbach's team also reported moderated policy attitudes, though later researchers have debated how reliably that attitude shift replicates. So the lesson is not, explain things and everyone becomes reasonable. Psychology is rarely that tidy and politics even less so. The more useful phrase is smaller, how exactly, not as a trap, as a private doorway into your own uncertainty. In 2024, Kerner, Schitz, and Peterson tested power across 3 pre-registered studies with a total sample of 607 participants. They found power increased general overconfidence but had only a small impact on the specific illusion of explanatory depth. That's interesting because it separates 2 kinds of certainty. Feeling generally capable is not the same as believing you can explain a mechanism. Think of a manager who speaks with absolute ease about software architecture, supply chains, or inflation. Ease can sound like depth. The +1 paper also examined narcissism and confidence, helping distinguish broad self-assurance from mechanism-specific overestimation. Confidence is social. It moves through posture, voice, status, and speed. But explanation has a colder requirement: connect the parts. A 2024 memory and cognition study examined cognitive load and found the illusion grows when mental resources are strained. Poor performance on concurrent memory tasks was associated with larger explanatory depth illusion magnitude. Inhale, that fits everyday life. The moments when we sound most certain are often the moments when we're tired, rushed, or overloaded. Before trusting a strong opinion formed under pressure, consider asking it one slow question tomorrow. Can I explain the steps? The same study found higher analytical processing related to lower illusion, suggesting careful stepwise thought can reduce overconfidence. Analytical doesn't mean smarter, it means less willing to accept the first smooth feeling as evidence that the inner model is complete. One approach is painfully simple. Say, first, this happens, then this causes that, then this changes the next thing. The zipper returns here. You don't need to become a zipper engineer, but you can notice where your explanation turns to fog. The collapse of confidence can feel embarrassing, but it is actually a measurement. The mind has found the edge of its map. Rozenblit and Keil showed people were less overconfident about procedures like making coffee than about hidden causal systems. Notice the verbs in your explanation. If they become vague, like affects, impacts, or somehow leads to, you may have found the gap. Before arguing strongly, try writing the causal chain in plain language. If you can't, that doesn't mean you're wrong, it means you're early. Researchers have found the illusion in judgments about devices, natural processes, health improvement, climate protection, mental disorders, and historical events. For health decisions, explaining a mechanism may help reveal questions, but consider qualified medical guidance before changing care or interpreting vaccines. The danger is not ignorance by itself. The danger is ignorance wearing the emotional costume of mastery. The 2013 political study suggested extreme policy positions can partly rest on feeling that one's causal understanding is deeper than it is. But we should be careful. A policy can be morally clear even when its mechanism is complicated. Explanation is not the only kind of understanding. Later work has treated the political moderation effect cautiously, while the basic explanatory depth illusion remains well supported. Use how exactly as a humility test, not a weapon. The goal is not to humiliate people, it's to make thinking more honest. You can feel the illusion in real time. Say, I understand Wi-Fi, then explain how the signal becomes the page loading. The feeling of knowing often arrives before the knowledge. It is fast, bodily, convincing. Explanation is slower and less flattering. Caviria and Corridor titled their study around understanding that is fast and shallow, linking speed with weaker metacognitive monitoring. Speed feels fluent. Fluency feels true. And once something feels true, the mind often stops asking whether the steps are actually there. A slow rehearsal helps. Try explaining a belief to an imaginary patient listener, one who keeps asking for the next causal link. With financial topics like inflation, consider separating labels from mechanisms. Research suggests step-by-step explanation may expose assumptions before money decisions. One beautiful part of this illusion is that it reveals how social intelligence works. We borrow competence from other minds constantly. Rozenblit and Keil argue that people rely on a division of cognitive labor, mistaking communal knowledge for personal understanding. Imagine explaining a vaccine, a court ruling, or a storm drain. You know the headline, but the mechanism asks for a different mind. At each missing link, you get a choice. Patch it with confidence, or pause and mark it as unknown. Make a map with 3 columns: what I know, what I infer, and what I am borrowing from someone else's expertise. The 2024 Power studies separated general overconfidence from explanatory overconfidence, which matters because different kinds of certainty may need different checks. This matters in teams. Groups can mistake a shared label for a shared model. Everyone nods at strategy while imagining different machinery underneath. In meetings, one approach is to ask for mechanism before voting. Not, do we like this, but how will it produce the promised change? If this kind of careful curiosity is why you listen, a quiet like or subscribe helps the show find people who enjoy nuance. The PLOS One review notes explanatory depth illusions have been studied beyond gadgets, including mental disorders and climate protection. That can make compassion easier. If my confidence can outrun my model, maybe someone else's certainty deserves curiosity before contempt. When someone sounds certain, you might ask, what would need to happen first? It is softer than prove it and often more revealing. The zipper was never the point. It was a doorway into the strange confidence of familiar things. Its confidence was borrowed from use, from repetition, from the fact that nothing had forced the mechanism into speech. Maybe the better question is not, do I understand this? Maybe it's, could I rebuild the chain without skipping the invisible parts? Understanding might not feel like confidence. Sometimes it feels like the moment confidence gets quieter, more precise, and more willing to ask for help. And the next time a zipper closes cleanly, maybe you'll feel a little less certain and a little more awake.